I found my neighbor's mail order bride half frozen. She slept in my bed that night. It was a cold winter evening, the kind where the wind cuts through your jacket and makes your teeth chatter no matter how many layers you wear.
The snow had been falling steadily all day, piling up in thick layers on the streets and sidewalks, turning the neighborhood into a quiet, white world. Most people had already gone inside, shutting their doors against the cold, but he still had some things to do before settling in for the night.
He wrapped his scarf tightly around his neck and stepped outside, carrying a small bag of trash to the bins at the end of the lane.
The street was quiet except for the soft crunch of snow under his boots and the occasional gust of wind that whipped through the trees, making them creak and shiver. He had always been a careful observer of the world around him. Living in this neighborhood for several years, he knew his neighbors, their routines, and even the smallest changes in the environment. That night, however, something felt off. Maybe it was the unusual silence, or perhaps it was the way the street lamps cast long shadows on the snow. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As he walked toward the bins, he noticed a small shape lying near the edge of the sidewalk, half hidden in the snow. At first he thought it was a discarded coat or a bag someone had left behind. But as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. The shape was moving slightly, and there was a faint sound, almost like a whimper. Narration process. He dropped the trash bag immediately and rushed toward it. The closer he got, the clearer it became. Someone was lying in the snow, struggling to stay awake. She was shivering uncontrollably, her skin pale, and her thin clothes offered almost no protection against the freezing cold. The sight made him gasp. He recognized her immediately! She was the young woman who had recently arrived as his neighbor's bride from another country. He had seen her once or twice, always quiet, always reserved, never speaking much. She seemed fragile even then, but seeing her like this was shocking. She looked like she might not survive the night if someone didn't help her. His mind raced. What should he do? Call someone? But he knew the cold was dangerous. Every second counted. He needed to act fast. He knelt beside her and tried to speak softly, to let her know she was not alone. Hey, can you hear me? He asked, his voice trembling slightly from both concern and the cold. At first, she did not respond. Breaths. Her eyes fluttered weakly, barely opening. He could see the fear in them, the confusion. It was clear she had been outside for some time and was losing strength quickly. Without a second thought, he scooped her up carefully, trying to avoid hurting her fragile body. She felt so light in his arms that it frightened him. He carried her toward his house, his boots slipping slightly in the deep snow. But he held on tightly, not willing to let her fall. Once inside, he set her down on the couch, wrapping her in a thick blanket. He could see her lips were blue, her hands shaking uncontrollably.
He quickly went to the kitchen to fetch warm water and a towel, trying to bring her body temperature back to normal. The house was warm, but it wasn't enough.
He knew she needed more than blankets. She needed someone who could stay with her, someone who would watch over her until she was safe. She tried to speak, but her words were weak and broken, almost like whispers carried away by the wind. Bet. He listened carefully, trying to understand, but mostly she just shivered and clung to the blanket. Her hair was wet, and her clothes stuck to her cold skin. It pained him to see her like this. So helpless, so vulnerable. He could not imagine what had led her to this situation, and he didn't need to. Right now, all that mattered was keeping her alive. He thought about calling his neighbor immediately, but something in him hesitated. He didn't know the full story of her life here yet. He didn't know what she had been through. And in that moment, he realized that maybe it wasn't safe for her to go back just yet. He would make sure she was warm, fed, and rested. He would do what he could tonight, and then worry about the rest later. For now, it was about survival. He filled a small bowl with warm water and a little sugar, hoping she could sip it. She tried, her hands trembling so much that he had to help her. He watched closely as she drank a little, encouraging her gently. Break. The night wore on slowly. The storm outside grew stronger, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. He could hear the wind moaning like a distant animal, and each sound made him more aware of the danger she had faced just to be here. She stayed mostly silent, occasionally muttering words he could not understand. Her eyes, wide and fearful, followed every move he made. It was clear she did not trust easily, that the world had not been kind to her. But despite her fear, there was a tiny glimmer of relief in her gaze, a quiet acknowledgement that she was safe, at least for now. Hours passed. He tried to make her comfortable, moving pillows behind her back and covering her with more blankets. Every so often he checked her breathing, her pulse, making sure she was stable. But he did not know how long she had been outside or what she had endured before he found her. The thought made his stomach twist. Whoever she was, she had been left to face the freezing night alone, and that was something no one deserved. He felt a quiet anger, not toward anyone in particular, but at the situation itself. Life could be cruel, and sometimes people who were meant to care the most fail to do so. By the early hours of the morning, she had finally stopped shivering as violently, her body slowly warming under the layers of blankets and gentle care. He could see her breathing becoming steadier. Her eyes, though still wary, began to close for brief moments, and he realized she needed rest more than anything else. There was no other safe option. The storm outside was still raging, and leaving her alone was unthinkable. He decided she would have to stay in his bed for the night, at least until she regained some strength. He cleared his own bed, making a space for her and covering her with warm blankets, while he stayed in a chair nearby, watching over her. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made him glance up, ready to act if she stirred or needed help. Throughout the night he thought about the woman's life, about what had brought her to this strange and frightening situation. He did not know her story fully, but he felt a deep connection, a responsibility to ensure that she was safe. He thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could turn dangerous. And yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he could make a difference, even in this small way. He could be the person who chose kindness when no one else was around, the person who acted when it mattered most. As the hours passed, he found himself reflecting on his own life too, on the routines and habits that had seemed so important but now felt trivial in comparison to the reality of saving someone's life. The night stretched long, and sleep was impossible. He watched the young woman breathe, listened to the soft rhythms of her chest, and felt a quiet hope growing inside him. Perhaps tomorrow the sun would rise, the storm would end, and she would be stronger. Perhaps there would be answers, there would be changes. There would be a chance for her to begin again. But for now, the night belonged to survival, to care, and to the silent promise he had made to himself, that she would not face the darkness alone. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in soft shades of gray and gold. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to feel that he had done everything he could. She was still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since he found her. And though the questions remained, though the world outside was still cold and uncertain, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. He had acted when it mattered, and in that small but profound way, he had changed the course of someone's life. The memory of that night, the sound of the storm, the feeling of carrying her to safety, would stay with him forever, a reminder that sometimes courage and compassion were all that stood between life and the cold. The morning light slowly filled the room, soft and pale against the curtains. Yet it was enough to show the young woman's fragile state. She lay under thick blankets, her hair slightly damp, and her face still pale. But the dangerous shivering had stopped. The main character watched her closely, noticing every small rise and fall of her chest, every blink and every tiny movement. He had been awake all night, unable to sleep, his mind a mix of worry, relief, and questions he did not yet dare to ask.
Her survival had been uncertain when he first found her in the snow, and now that she was here, safe for the moment, he realized that the night had changed something inside him, a sense of responsibility he could not ignore.
Breaky. He gently adjusted the blankets around her, careful not to startle her. She stirred slightly, mumbling something unintelligible, and opened her eyes, slowly. They were wide and filled with fear, the kind that spoke of exhaustion and confusion, of a life far from what she had expected. When she saw him, she flinched, her thin hands rising slightly in instinctive defense. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm.
"It's okay," he said softly.
"You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." She didn't respond, but her eyes lingered on him, cautious yet searching, trying to decide if she could trust him.
He smiled gently, hoping his calm tone could reach her despite her fear.
He went to the kitchen to make her something warm to drink.
He filled a small cup with hot tea and a little sugar, careful not to make it too strong or too hot. When he brought it back, he knelt beside her on the bed and held it to her lips. She sipped slowly at first, her hands trembling. He guided her gently, encouraging her, speaking softly all the while.
"It's okay, just small sips."
"You need to warm up." She followed his instructions slowly, her eyes still wary, but a tiny sense of relief seemed to pass over her. The warmth of the drink helped her feel a little more in control, a little less frightened, though the fear in her eyes had not disappeared entirely. After a few minutes, he set the cup aside and studied her more carefully. She was thin, her frame fragile, and her clothes were wet and inadequate for the cold she had faced. He realized she had come here with almost nothing, a bride in a foreign country with few protections and even fewer allies. His mind filled with questions. How had she ended up outside in the snow, alone and unprotected? What kind of life had she been promised, and what had reality given her instead? He didn't have answers, but he knew that for now he had to focus on what he could do. Keep her warm, fed, and safe. He cleared a small space on the bed, making it comfortable for her to rest properly. "You should lie down more comfortably," he said, moving pillows around her back. She hesitated, looking at him as if unsure whether she should trust his suggestion. He nodded patiently, understanding her caution. "It's okay," he said. "You don't need to worry about anything here. Just rest." Slowly, she adjusted herself, curling under the blankets. Rest. She was still tense, her muscles stiff, and her breathing uneven. But she stayed, allowing herself a few moments of rest. It was the first time since the night before that she could let go even slightly, and he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He left her to rest while he tidied up the room and prepared some simple food. There was bread, some cheese, and a few fruits in the kitchen. Rasp. He didn't know if she could eat much yet, but he prepared everything anyway. Returning with a small plate, he offered it gently. Oh. She took a piece of bread but barely touched it, her appetite suppressed by fatigue and fear. He didn't push her. Breath. Instead, he sat nearby, eating a small portion himself, speaking softly to her all the while. He told her about the morning, about small ordinary things, the way the snow had fallen, how the birds struggled to find food, how he had walked past the empty streets. His voice was calm, friendly, and careful not to overwhelm her. Slowly she listened, sometimes looking at him, sometimes staring at the plate. But she did not withdraw completely. Rask. As the hours passed, she began to speak more, though in broken sentences. She mentioned her journey, the long flight from her home country, and how different everything had been from what she expected. She spoke quietly, as if afraid her words might cause trouble, or as if she had been told to keep quiet all her life. He listened patiently, never interrupting, never judging. He asked small questions, careful not to push her too far, letting her tell her story at her own pace. The words she shared painted a picture of isolation, of promises unfulfilled, and of a world that had been harsher than anyone should endure. Each word made him more determined to help her, to ensure that she had a safe place, at least for now. Despite the growing sunlight, the storm outside continued, preventing him from considering taking her anywhere else. He realized that leaving her alone, even for a short trip, could be dangerous. Her body had barely survived the night, and her trust in the world was fragile. He made the decision that she should stay, at least until she was stronger, until she felt more secure. That meant sharing his space, his home, and even his bed temporarily. It was a strange thought for him, but he did not hesitate. Her safety mattered more than any discomfort he might feel. He moved to clear the bed once more, creating a warm, safe place for her to rest fully. She accepted, curling into the blankets, her eyes wide but not resistant. He stayed in a chair nearby, keeping watch as she closed her eyes for the first real sleep since he had found her. Throughout the day, he continued small acts of care, refilling her water, offering tea, adjusting blankets, and speaking softly. He also made sure the house was warm, checking the windows and doors to keep the cold out. Occasionally, she would stir, mumble something, or reach for a blanket, and he would respond quickly, gentle but alert. It was a day filled with quiet tension, but also with small moments of trust, tiny signs that she was beginning to believe she was safe. Every glance, every soft movement told him that he had made the right decision in helping her. Her life, for the first time in what seemed like forever, was in a place of care rather than danger. By the evening, she was a little stronger. She ate more, sipped her tea more steadily, and even managed a faint smile when he offered her a clean towel. The change was small, almost imperceptible, but it filled him with hope. The storm was still outside, but inside there was a sense of quiet companionship, an understanding that she was not alone anymore. He realized that survival was not just about warmth or food. It was about trust, about showing someone that they were seen and cared for when the world had been cruel. As night fell again, he prepared for another long vigil. He made sure the blankets were tucked snugly around her, the room warm and safe. She lay down fully, finally allowing herself to rest, and he sat nearby, alert, ready to respond if she needed him. He thought about the day, about the fragile trust that had begun to form between them, and about the long journey ahead. She was safe for now, but tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, and perhaps even danger if the world outside remained unkind. But for tonight, he focused on the small victories, her warmth, her breathing, her presence. She had survived the night, and she was still here. Throughout that night, he thought about her life, about the courage it must have taken for her to endure so much, and about the loneliness that must have accompanied her every step. He realized that his own life, filled with routines and ordinary concerns, had suddenly become intertwined with hers in a way he had never expected. The experience had changed him, deepened his understanding of human vulnerability, and reminded him of the power of compassion.
It was a quiet, ordinary night, yet it carried the weight of something extraordinary, the chance to save a life, to offer trust, and to be a witness to the beginning of someone's new path.
By the time the first hints of dawn appeared again, he allowed himself a moment of rest, knowing that she was breathing steadily, her body slowly regaining strength. He reflected on the day, on the quiet moments of connection, and on the unspoken bond forming between them. The storm outside had continued, relentless and unforgiving. But inside there was warmth, safety, and a fragile sense of hope.
The night had been long, the day longer, but together they had survived, and that was something neither of them would forget.
The morning sunlight was brighter than the previous day, filtering gently through the curtains and casting soft patterns on the bed. The storm outside had eased a little, leaving the world covered in a thick, sparkling layer of snow. Inside, the young woman stirred, her eyes opening slowly as she blinked at the light. She was stronger than yesterday, her shivering almost gone, but her face still carried the traces of fear and exhaustion. The main character sitting quietly nearby noticed her movements and smiled gently. He did not rush her, for he knew that patience and quiet kindness were more important than words right now. She looked around the room cautiously, as if noticing her surroundings fully for the first time. Her gaze lingered on the warm blankets, the simple furniture, and the food he had prepared. Breaths. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she began to speak, her voice soft, trembling, and broken. At first, it was just a few words, almost whispers, describing how cold the night had been, how lonely and how frightened she felt. He listened carefully, nodding, encouraging her to continue. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to worry. I am here." As she gained a little strength, her words came clearer. She told him about her journey to this country, how she had left home with hope, trusting the promises made to her about a better life, a loving family, and a safe home. She had imagined warmth and kindness, new beginnings, and a place where she could belong. But reality had been very different. From the moment she arrived, she felt isolated, misunderstood, and scared. Her husband, the neighbor, was distant, controlling, and cold. She had no friends, no family, and no one to turn to. The young woman's voice broke as she described the fear that had accompanied her every step in the house where she was supposed to feel safe. The main character listened silently, his heart heavy with each word she spoke.
He had suspected that her life had not been easy, but hearing her speak made it painfully real.
He understood now why she had been outside in the snow, why she had wandered into danger. She had tried to escape the house she feared, to find even a moment of safety and warmth, and in doing so, she had nearly lost her life. It was a sobering realization that the danger she had faced was not just from the cold, but from a life that had offered her very little care or protection. Bess, he asked gently about her experiences, careful not to push her too far, knowing that trust was fragile and could be lost with just the wrong question. She spoke of small incidents that had frightened her, arguments she did not understand, restrictions on what she could do, and the constant pressure to behave in a way she did not feel comfortable with. That she had been promised love and support, but instead she had been left alone in a foreign country, struggling to survive in silence. As she spoke, her fear was palpable, yet there was also a quiet strength emerging, a determination to tell her story, to be heard, and to reclaim some sense of control over her life. The main character felt a mix of emotions, anger at the unfairness of her situation, sadness at the loneliness she had endured, but also a deep respect for her courage. He realized that the night she had spent in his care had been more than just survival. It had been the beginning of trust. She had taken a risk by accepting his help, and now she was beginning to speak her truth. He encouraged her gently, reassuring her that she was safe and that she could tell him as much or as little as she wanted. Hours passed as she shared more of her story. She spoke of small joys she had once held on to, memories of home, and the hope she had carried on the long journey. She spoke of the confusion and fear she felt in a world so different from her own, where language, customs, and expectations made her feel lost. And she spoke of the moment she realized that she had to escape, that staying silent would only keep her trapped in fear. Her words painted a picture of someone who had endured so much yet had not given up entirely. The main character offered quiet support, asking small questions to clarify and gently encouraging her to continue. He did not judge or rush her. He understood that her story was hers to tell in her own time, and he honored that. He also realized that her situation was more serious than he had first thought. This was not just a case of someone caught in the cold. It was a life that had been trapped in fear and uncertainty, and it required more than warmth and food. It required understanding, patience, and protection. By midday, she was calmer and her words flowed more easily. She spoke of the moments she had felt completely alone, when even the simplest acts of kindness seemed impossible to imagine. She told him about the night before, how she had wandered outside not knowing where to go or whom to trust. She remembered the snow covering her feet, the icy wind biting at her face, and the fear that she might not survive until morning. Yet she also spoke of the moment she saw him, of the relief and disbelief that someone had come to help her without hesitation. It was a small miracle in her eyes, and had marked the beginning of a shift in her trust toward the world. As the day moved into afternoon, the main character realized that he needed to plan carefully. The young woman could not return to the house she feared, at least not immediately. Best, she needed somewhere safe, somewhere she could recover fully and begin to regain confidence in herself. He considered the options carefully, knowing that each choice carried consequences. He also knew that her trust in him was growing, fragile though it was, and that he had a responsibility to protect her from harm while helping her find a way forward. He decided to focus on the present first, on helping her regain her strength, on giving her small comforts that could make the day more bearable. He prepared a simple meal and offered it to her, making sure it was easy to eat and gentle on her stomach. She took small bites, her hands steadying as she ate. He stayed nearby, offering quiet conversation and reassurance, talking about ordinary things to distract her from fear and to show her that life could be calm and kind, even in small ways. But that afternoon, they continued to talk. She shared fragments of her past life, memories of family and friends she had left behind, and her hopes for a future she still wished could be brighter. Her voice carried both sorrow and hope, and the main character felt a deep sense of empathy. He understood that the night she had spent half frozen in the snow had been a turning point, a moment where she had chosen life, trust, and the possibility of change. And he realized that his role in her life, though small at first, could have a profound impact on her ability to heal and move forward. By evening, she was stronger still, though still fragile. Her fear had not vanished entirely, but the intensity had lessened. She trusted him enough to allow him to make decisions for her safety, and in return he had learned to listen, to be patient, and to honor her story without judgment. The bond between them, though unspoken, was growing, built on trust, kindness, and the shared experience of surviving a dangerous night. As night fell, he prepared the room for her to rest comfortably. The blankets were warm, the room safe, and the small lights provided a soft glow. He made sure she had everything she needed within reach, from water to small comforts that could help her feel more secure. She lay down, her eyes reflecting both caution and a faint relief. He stayed nearby, watching over her as she drifted off to sleep, knowing that the night would be long but calmer than before. Throughout the night, he reflected on the day and the story she had shared. He realized that helping someone in need was not just about immediate action. It was about understanding, listening, and offering patience. The young woman had shared her hidden truth, revealing the struggles and fears she had endured in silence, and in doing so, she had allowed him to become part of her journey, even if only for a brief moment. The night passed slowly, each hour filled with quiet care and careful observation. By the time dawn appeared again, the young woman was breathing steadily, her body slowly regaining warmth and strength. The main character felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she was safe and that she had begun to trust again. He understood that this was only the beginning of her journey, that challenges remained and that decisions in the coming days would be important. But for now, he had helped her face the darkness and fear, and that small victory carried immense meaning for both of them. He also realized that the night had changed him. He had seen the fragility of life and the strength it took to survive. He had learned that compassion and patience could make a difference, even in the most difficult situations. And he had learned that trust, once given, was precious and fragile, requiring careful nurturing and respect. The young woman's story had revealed the hidden truth of her life, and he knew that his role was not only to help her survive physically, but also to support her emotionally as she faced the world ahead. By the time the sun rose higher, painting the room with soft light, the young woman stirred again. She looked at him, her expression softer than the day before, a hint of gratitude and trust in her eyes. He smiled, nodding gently, and she returned a small, tentative smile. It was a quiet moment, yet it spoke volumes. The night of survival had passed, the day of revelation had come, and the path forward, though uncertain, held the possibility of hope and safety for the first time in her life. The morning was quiet at first, almost deceptively peaceful. The snow from the storm had begun to melt slightly, leaving small patches of wet ground and frozen slush along the streets. Inside the house, the young woman was awake, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed. She looked more alert than the previous day, her eyes brighter though they still carried the weight of fear and uncertainty. The main character watched her carefully. He knew that the day ahead would be difficult, filled with questions, decisions, and the possibility of confrontation. But he also knew that he could not ignore the reality any longer. The young woman needed more than temporary safety. She needed protection and clarity about what would happen next. As he prepared a simple breakfast, the woman spoke hesitantly, her voice soft but steady. Breaths. She asked questions about the world outside, about her options, and about what could be done to ensure she was safe. He answered as best he could, carefully choosing words that would reassure her while remaining realistic. "We will figure this out," he said calmly.
But for now, focus on eating and staying warm.
"You've been through a lot, and your strength matters." She nodded, taking small bites of the food he offered. And he could see the faint relief in her eyes. But it was a small victory, but a meaningful one.
A knock on the door startled them both.
Right. He hesitated, unsure who it could be.
Opening the door slightly, he was met with the face of his neighbor, the husband of the young woman, looking confused, anxious, and increasingly suspicious.
"Where is she?" the neighbor demanded, his voice tense. "I haven't seen my wife since last night." The man stepped aside slightly, motioning for the neighbor to come in, but he felt a sudden tightness in his chest. He knew he had to handle this carefully. This was not just about honesty. It was about protecting someone vulnerable while managing the dangers of suspicion and anger. He explained calmly that he had found the woman outside nearly frozen and had brought her inside to protect her. He emphasized that his actions had been purely out of concern for her safety. Breaths. "She was in danger," he said firmly. "I couldn't leave her there. She might not have survived the night." The neighbor's expression shifted from confusion to frustration. He stepped closer, scanning the room, noticing the blankets, the food, and the signs that someone had been cared for. His eyes narrowed, suspicion growing, and the tension in the room became almost unbearable. The young woman stayed silent, but her presence was enough to heighten the tension. She was no longer just a silent figure. She had a story, a reason for being there, and the courage to speak if needed.
The main character realized that this moment could determine what would happen next, whether she remained safe, whether he was accused of wrongdoing, or whether the situation could escalate into something more dangerous. He remained calm, steady, and firm, ready to defend the choices he had made while ensuring that she had the space to respond if necessary. The neighbor's frustration grew, and he began asking more pointed questions, his tone sharper now. "Why didn't you call me immediately?" he demanded. "Why is she here, in your house?" The main character answered patiently, explaining that the young woman's safety was his only concern and that the storm had made outside travel dangerous. He emphasized that her well-being came first. The neighbor's expression softened slightly, but suspicion lingered, his eyes darting between the two of them as if trying to read some hidden truth.
As the conversation continued, the young woman finally spoke.
Her voice was quiet but firm. She told her husband in simple and measured words why she had left the house. She explained the fear she felt, the lack of care and understanding, and the moments that had made her feel unsafe. Her words were carefully chosen, but they carried weight, revealing a side of their life together that had been hidden beneath appearances. The neighbor listened, a mix of surprise, anger, and confusion crossing his face. It was clear that he had not expected her to speak so openly, and for the first time he had to confront the reality of her feelings and experiences. The main character watched silently, ready to intervene if necessary. He understood that this was not just a conversation.
It was a confrontation, a test of courage and truth.
The young woman's honesty had shifted the balance of power, and now the neighbor had to decide how to respond. Would he continue to demand control? Or would he begin to see the consequences of his actions and the fear he had caused? The tension in the room was thick, each second stretching longer than the last as all three considered the next steps carefully. Eventually, the neighbor's demeanor began to change. The initial anger gave way to frustration, then to a quiet recognition that things were not as simple as he had believed. He asked more questions, this time less accusatory and more curious, trying to understand what had happened and why.
Ha!
The young woman answered cautiously, describing her perspective without blaming excessively, focusing instead on her feelings and the moments of fear and uncertainty that had brought her to safety. The main character supported her subtly, ensuring that she could speak freely while maintaining a calm and controlled atmosphere. Authorities became involved shortly after the tense morning. The main character had contacted social services quietly, knowing that professionals could provide guidance and protection. Officers arrived to ask questions and assess the situation. They listened carefully to the young woman's account, as well as to the main character's explanation of the events. Through their investigation, they discovered troubling details about the home environment and the treatment she had endured. The young woman, for the first time, realized that she had people willing to listen, willing to act, and willing to ensure her safety.
The day stretched on with careful conversations, questions, and documentation.
The young woman began to feel a sense of empowerment, knowing that her voice mattered and that her experience was being taken seriously.
The main character stayed close, offering reassurance, patience, and quiet encouragement.
This was more than a single night of care. It was the beginning of a process to ensure justice, safety, and the possibility of a better future. Throughout the day, emotions ran high.
The neighbor continued to challenge aspects of the situation, sometimes with anger, sometimes with disbelief, but the presence of professionals and the young woman's calm, honest account made it clear that the circumstances were serious and that action was necessary.
The main character remained composed, offering facts, recounting the events clearly, and demonstrating that his intentions had been solely to protect and assist. By evening, a resolution of sorts began to emerge. The young woman would not return immediately to the home where she had felt unsafe. Social services arranged for a temporary safe place for her to stay, where she could recover and begin to make decisions about her future. The main character felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that she was finally safe, concern for the challenges she would face as she navigated a new environment, and pride in the courage she had shown. That night, as she rested in a safe place for the first time, the main character reflected on the events of the day. The situation had been tense, frightening, and complicated, yet it had also revealed the strength of human compassion and courage. Inspiration. He realized that sometimes doing the right thing required standing firm in the face of suspicion and potential consequences.
It was not easy, but it was necessary.
The young woman's life, her safety, and her ability to speak her truth had depended on those decisions. The young woman herself lay quietly, thinking about the events of the day. She had faced confrontation, fear, and uncertainty, but she had also found allies, people who had acted without judgment and who had listened to her story. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of possibility, a belief that she could begin to rebuild her life and find safety, dignity, and respect. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, she had taken a crucial first step toward independence and self-advocacy. In the quiet of the night, the main character allowed himself to breathe deeply. He understood that the day had tested patience, courage, and integrity. It had shown him the importance of standing by someone in need, of listening without judgment, and of acting decisively when a life hung in the balance. But though there were more challenges ahead, he knew that the night of danger, the day of revelation, and the tense confrontation had all led to a step forward.
A step towards safety, trust, and a chance at a better life.
By the time the storm had passed completely, leaving the world glistening and silent under a layer of snow, the young woman was secure. The neighbor had been confronted with the consequences of his actions, and the main character had fulfilled a difficult but vital responsibility. The events of the day had been a turning point, not only for the young woman's safety, but also for the understanding that courage, truth, and compassion could create meaningful change even in the most challenging circumstances. The young woman awoke to a quiet morning, the sunlight streaming softly through the small window of the safe house where she had been placed. For the first time in many days, she did not feel the icy fear that had haunted her since arriving in the new country. She stretched slightly under the warm blankets and noticed the calm around her, the absence of tension, and the simple comfort of safety.
The storm had passed entirely, leaving the world outside crisp and bright, the snow sparkling in the sunlight.
Inside, she felt a different kind of warmth, not just from the room, but from the knowledge that she was no longer alone, no longer trapped in a life of fear, and no longer invisible in the eyes of those who mattered. The main character had visited briefly the previous evening, ensuring that she had everything she needed and that she understood the support available to her. He had brought a small basket of food, warm clothes, and some personal care items, but more importantly, he had brought reassurance and kindness.
"You are safe," he told her quietly, sitting across from her at the small table.
"Take your time. No one can hurt you here, and no one can make you go back unless you want to."
She nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in.
They were simple words, but they carried a promise she had never heard before, a promise of safety, freedom, and choice.
The young woman began to reflect on the events that had brought her here. She thought about the night she had been half frozen outside, the fear that had gripped her body, and the kindness of a stranger who had risked discomfort and suspicion to help her. She remembered the long hours of conversation, the patience he had shown, and the trust she had begun to place in someone other than her husband. Each memory was a reminder that even in the darkest times, human compassion could create hope. The realization filled her with gratitude, and she felt a quiet determination to reclaim her life and make choices for herself, no matter how difficult they might be. As the day unfolded, social workers and counselors visited to explain her options and guide her through the next steps. They discussed temporary housing, legal protections, and the possibility of reconnecting with family in her home country if she wished. They explained her rights and listened patiently to her story, acknowledging her fears and validating her experiences. For the first time, she felt that her voice mattered, that her story could influence her future, and that she was not powerless. Each conversation strengthened her confidence, showing her that she had the ability to make decisions about her life and her future. The main character continued to support her in quiet ways, offering guidance without pressure, and showing her that care could exist without expectation. Great. He helped her navigate the forms and appointments, explained the small details about daily life in a new environment, and offered encouragement when she doubted herself. His calm presence was reassuring, and his actions reinforced the lesson she had begun to learn, that she could trust, that she could speak, and that she could survive beyond fear. Over the following days, she began to regain her independence.
Simple routines, like preparing our own meals, taking walks around the safe property, and communicating with officials, helped her build confidence.
Each small success was a victory, a reminder that she could manage her life and that she was capable of strength even after such a frightening experience. She learned to sleep peacefully at night, no longer haunted by the terror of being left alone in the cold. And with each step, the trauma of the past night and the previous days gradually began to feel less overwhelming, replaced by the faint but growing sense of hope. Meanwhile, the main character returned to his quiet routines, but the events of the past days lingered in his mind. He reflected on the moral weight of his choices and the consequences of actions taken out of empathy and urgency. He realized that sometimes doing the right thing meant confronting suspicion, criticism, and complicated emotions. Yet it was worth it when a life was at stake. Patience. The experience had changed him, deepening his understanding of courage, patience, and the human need for kindness and protection. He had learned that even small actions, taken in moments of crisis, could have long-lasting impact on someone's life. The young woman began to plan for her future. She explored educational opportunities, thought about employment possibilities, and even considered reconnecting with people from her home country. But she no longer felt trapped by fear, but inspired by the chance to build a life according to her own choices. She also understood that she could set boundaries, stand up for herself, and seek help when needed. The nights of fear and uncertainty were behind her, replaced by a sense of control over her own destiny. At the same time, the neighbor had been confronted with the consequences of his actions.
He had been required to answer questions, acknowledge his behavior, and cooperate with authorities.
Brace. The process was difficult for him, but it underscored an important lesson: that neglect, control, and indifference could have serious consequences, and that those who were vulnerable deserved protection and respect. It was a quiet victory for justice, even if it was not dramatic or loud. The main character had played a key role in ensuring that fairness and safety prevailed, demonstrating the importance of intervention when someone's well-being is at stake. The young woman's gratitude toward the main character was quiet but profound.
She had been saved from immediate danger, supported through emotional turmoil, and guided toward safety and independence.
She knew that her trust in him had been a critical turning point in her survival, and she would never forget the calm, steady, and compassionate presence that had kept her alive and helped her begin again. In turn, the main character felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that his actions had truly mattered, that he had made a difference, and that he had upheld the principles of care, patience, and courage when they were needed most. As weeks passed, she grew stronger, more confident, and more independent. She learned to navigate daily life, to manage her responsibilities, and to face challenges with resilience. Her smile returned more often, and her laughter, quiet at first, began to fill the safe house. Each day brought new opportunities, new experiences, and a slowly growing sense of freedom. She had survived a terrifying night, faced difficult truths, and emerged stronger than she had ever imagined. And all of it was possible because someone had chosen to act when action mattered most. By the time she was ready to move to a more permanent, safe situation, she felt prepared to step into a life of her own making. Rise. She had the skills, the confidence, and the support system to continue growing, learning, and thriving. The memory of that first night, the cold, the fear, the uncertainty, remained, but it had transformed from a memory of danger into a memory of survival and trust. It was a reminder of what was possible when compassion meets courage, and when someone is willing to take responsibility for another's safety. On her last morning in the safe house, she looked back one final time, a quiet smile on her face. The main character stood nearby, offering her reassurance and encouragement for the next step. "Remember," he said gently, "you are strong, capable, and deserving of safety and happiness." Praying. "Never forget that." She nodded, her eyes shining, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face the world on her own terms. The story of that night, the days of care, and the eventual safety she found became a quiet but powerful example of human resilience, empathy, and the importance of acting when someone is in danger. The main character returned to his own life, carrying with him the knowledge that he had made a meaningful difference, that courage and compassion were never wasted, and that one act of kindness could change a life forever. In the end, the young woman's future was no longer uncertain. She had safety, support, and a growing sense of independence. Fresh. The fear that had once controlled her life was replaced with confidence and hope. She knew the path ahead would still have challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. And the main character, who had acted without hesitation on that cold, snowy night, carried the quiet satisfaction of having been a guardian, a witness, and a friend. Together, their stories intertwined for a brief but unforgettable time, leaving both forever changed and proving that courage, trust, and compassion could triumph even in the darkest circumstances.